What do you feel was Jackson's impact on modern democratic politics, and how much does Jackson's story help us understand the current political landscape today?
I think that, first of all, as you started talking about, the Rainbow Coalition was a concept that inclusion in our politics is more than just asking for votes. It's also including all of those groups in the building of the political system, in actually centering their community interests in the agenda of the party. And so that was different in many ways from what all of the other candidates were talking about. They weren't even really talking about that. I mean, they were asking for the votes, but they weren't really going into those communities and understanding the needs. Reverend Jackson did that in so many different ways. I mean, he obviously did that for Black Americans, but he went to San Francisco and he stood with the grieving mother of Vincent Chin, a young man who had basically been lynched on the streets of America for being Asian American. And he rallied with that community and created a lasting impact with that community, and brought them into the Rainbow Coalition, brought them into the political process and said, we are going to center your community needs in our campaign. I'm going to not just talk about this in front of you, but in front of the rest of the country. And he incorporated Vincent Chin's story in his campaign speeches as he went around the country. Same is true of Arab Americans. One of the very first things that he did that he got a lot of flack for was he went to a political conference for Arab Americans, and he spoke in front of that conference. And he got a ton of backlash because at the time it was unheard of for a presidential candidate to talk about Arab Americans. They were being asked to return money if Arab Americans gave to their campaigns. But Jesse Jackson did the opposite. And so these constituent groups, it was more than just lip service. Farmers, white farmers, he rallied with them between 1984 and 1988, when he wasn't even running for president. He was on the picket line in front of the courthouses, protesting with them to save family farms. He was the only candidate talking about aid to farmers at a time when bankruptcies and farmer suicides, by the way, were at all-time highs. And so it wasn't just communities of color. It was also just saying, how do you really build a coalition? How do you really speak to people about their core interests and then show them that they have those interests in common? That's what Jesse Jackson did that was different. And I do think that today's Democratic Party looks the way that it does, in large part because of the work that Jesse Jackson did. And a lot of time has passed. I do think in the 2000s, the Democratic Party moved away from this idea that that they should fight for working class Americans, that globalization and corporate interests and tacking to the center on those economic issues became more of a vehicle of accumulating power for more and more Democrats. And so there was a shift away from focusing on the economic needs of the average American, and particularly working class people, particularly people in the heartland of the country, who eventually then slid over to Donald Trump's column. So that vacuum that was created by an abandonment of what Jesse Jackson was arguing for in the 1980s is part of what created the conditions that allowed Donald Trump to exploit that very real discontent among working people and use it to become president of the United States. And so I think Democrats are grappling with that right now. How do you get back the trust of Americans so they believe you when you say you're fighting for them and not fighting for the establishment and the system as it is? There's a rhetorical difference between what Trump has said and how he's governed. Sometimes there are two different things. But I do think that when you look at how he talked about economics in populist terms in his 2016 campaign in particular, you see that what he's doing is driving a Mack truck through a gap that was created by 2 decades of Democrats moving toward corporatism and away from the concerns of working people, particularly working white people who've been moving away since the Reagan years.